to begin. There was a lot of detail there. It was a little bit frustrating that we had to wade through almost an hour of discussion about the federal government and President Trump. I get it, he's running for president, but our basic challenge, that is that ongoing expenses are exceeding ongoing revenues out for several years. That is unchanged, and it's important to note that that problem existed before President Trump was elected. The point is, California's problems are California's problems. And as a brief overview, the governor balances the budget with taxes that are almost 10 times any revenue reductions. And we still have over $30 billion in unpaid internal debt. And that structural deficit, he says it's solved through till 2028. That's a misnomer because it still exists from years beyond that, not to mention the unemployment insurance debt about which he does nothing. So he is indeed shoving an existing and significant budget problem onto the next governor and plaguing the rest of Californians beyond 2028.
Can I ask you then, Budget Policy Center reckons that we have a revenue issue because of the pandemic, costs have gone up. We need to find new ways to get revenue streams, such as water's edge tax going away, percentage tax on big corporations to help with Medicare funding. What are your thoughts on revenue?
Well, first of all, this year's revenue is a record number one. Secondly, it's still increasing. When you have revenues that are increasing and you want to solve your budget problem by increasing revenue, that is just poor budget management. We're spending too much money, and that increase in spending versus revenues has largely happened under Governor Newsom's governorship. He was handed a pretty decent budget situation by Governor Brown.
Senator, you are a well-known businessman in this region, and the governor has unveiled a series of proposals on the LLC fee for new businesses and also the limit on major corporations. But I also just asked him about the unemployment debt to the federal government right now that I know all businesses are footing because there was nothing put on the principal. I mean, how would you say this budget impacts businesses in this state?
Well, overall negatively. The franchise fee, reducing it from $800 to $400 one time for a starting business, but then it goes back to $800, to say that that is a significant assist to small businesses is a bit of a stretch. The franchise fee in itself doesn't make sense because you're taxing businesses before they even make any money. But overall, this budget is obviously not good news for businesses generally. And I have to emphasize the unemployment insurance debt. It's $20 billion. There have been a couple of budget cycles where the governor and the budget ended up allocating maybe a few $100 million to that debt, to a $20 billion debt. That doesn't even rate to a drop in the bucket. So that creates a huge burden on businesses, frankly, more on smaller businesses, but it keeps increasing each and every year that debt is outstanding, maximizing out to, I think it's $430 per employee or so when it hits its maximum about 10 years from now. That debt has got to be paid, and get this, California is the only state in the union that took on this debt during the pandemic shutdown and didn't pay it back. Every other state has paid that debt back. California leads the way, right?
Senator Niello, what funds do you want to see used to pay off that UI debt?
Well, we probably have to get creative because it's such a large number and it's going to take a number of years. But that gets back to what I said initially, is the governor is balancing this budget with tax increases that are almost 10 times the spending increases. In other words, he really isn't doing anything about the structural debt, bringing spending down to a level below revenues, at which point we could start paying that debt off.
Senator Niello, I just want to get your reactions to it's still $100 million that's going to Prop 36. I know your caucus, or some members of your caucus, asked for a little bit more. Just what your thoughts about that, and as far as not getting the increase in the budget.
Anybody will tell you that $100 billion is not adequate. Even my friends on the other side of the aisle, most of them will tell you that that is not enough money. We need at least $300 to $400 million. The really expensive part of Proposition 36 is drug treatment. Frankly, I think that was probably the most important part of Proposition 36. But $100 million is not enough to address that problem. And the governor was opposed to Proposition 36, and so his position is don't give it any money at all, regardless of the fact that 70% of the voters supported it. But $100 billion is better than nothing, but it's still not enough.
Senator, can you reflect at all on Prop 36? And it just doesn't seem to have been as much of a conversation topic this year. Are you aware of how things are going with Prop 36? I mean, what's the state of it?
It is, I don't think anybody can say that it has been as effective as the proponents of that want to be, but it's because there isn't enough funding. Counties are struggling to provide the treatment assistance to people who desperately need it. That is a significant contributor to our homeless problem, drug addiction and mental illness. It is expensive to treat those things. And as I said, $100 million is not enough. And so it's being basically starved to death. And I have a feeling perhaps that's what the governor's objective is.
Seems like what he said.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you believe the AI boom that we get a lot of our revenue from, that's helping? Are you worried about that the bubble is going to burst when it comes to the AI bubble?
Absolutely. This stock market looks a lot like the dot-com crash of 25 years ago. There have been recent articles in the Wall Street Journal that has said exactly that, and the article was showing some of the commonalities between price-earnings ratios and the like from then until now. And I'm surprised at the strength of the market. And one could say, well, the market is so strong, and you've been saying, watch out for a crash, as has the LAO for the last 6 months or so, but it keeps getting higher. Well, maybe that's beginning to make my case. It cannot, stock markets never go up forever. And the further they go up in terms of inflated values, the harder the fall. And I'm very concerned about that.
I was just gonna say, if there is a bubble, if the bubble does burst, this $0 structural deficit that Newsom is talking about having gotten us down to through 2028, I mean, is that out the window, or what is that?
It explodes, of course. If right now, again, I said before, our revenues are increasing, and yet expenses continue to increase more than that. And if that bubble bursts, then we would have a severe revenue challenge. And again, I'm sure there are a lot of Democrats who would say, well, we got to solve that by imposing taxes of another sort, which is just going to slow down the economy and make that stock market slow down even worse. Again, I express, as we have said, our problem is not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem.
And you might have said this already, but where do we need to cut spending?
Well, as I've said, I can't answer that specifically, because what we need to do is take a look at specific programs, especially those that have been either begun or enhanced since the huge surplus years of 2020 and 2021, and assess whether or not they're accomplishing what they were intended to accomplish, or even if they are, is their increase in spending unsustainable? And that'll give us a roadmap as to where and how we can cut back spending.
Senator Niello, the question wasn't asked, I'm sorry, the question wasn't asked to the governor though, but about, cutting the gas tax, for the state. Just want to get your position on that and,
Well, cutting the gas tax brings up all sorts of other issues relative to gasoline affordability, which is driven by more things than just the gas tax. Now, our gas tax is the highest in the country, or at least among the highest. I believe it is the highest. And to have a holiday of the gas tax during this time when gas prices have inflated significantly is a good idea. But I just point out that our prices here in California are still $1.50 to $2 higher than the rest of the country. And part of it's because of the higher gas tax, but quite a bit of it is because of regulations that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and imposes higher costs on refineries and gas sellers. And in fact, our affordability problem in California is entirely due to California regulations. We can't affect inflation, but we need regulatory reform. And regulatory reform would affect all sorts of affordability issues, beginning with gasoline.
Senator, can I ask you, I've heard a lot from the counties saying that they're very worried about HR 1 and its implications on intensive care and how they are going to pay for any medical care for these people who slip off. I don't know if you've spoken to counties, what they're telling you, that there's numbers they're throwing around in billions that they're going to need from what happened comes from HR 1. The governor just mentioned that we're going to have to get creative. We're ongoing talks with the counties. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. The problem isn't just cuts in programs. The problem is largely that they've moved to more of a needs-based, I'll put it in my pocket, more of a needs-based approach that if people can prove that they're working or looking for work, they can be eligible for the benefits. I will admit that that's hard to do, so the state could assist counties in with resources to provide counseling to people to help them prove those work requirements to the federal government. That could make a big difference.
Do you think the state should do that?
Hey, pardon?
Do you think the state should provide that funding? That's part thereof.
I think that would be a reasonable proposal. The Senate Democrats, in their budget letter of 2 weeks ago, I think, had money in their proposal exactly for that, and I thought that made good sense.
I was just gonna ask, you might have already answered this too, but what do you think Gavin Newsom's budget legacy will be, as this is his last budget?
Well, it certainly won't be as good as Governor Brown's. And he says he's leaving a balanced budget for the next governor. He's not. Now, the balance is nominally balanced for 26, 27, and 27, 28. I would point out a couple of things. Number one, the budget that is passed on June 15th is never the final budget. We continue to work on it. That's just a constitutional requirement so legislators can get paid, right? It is a placeholder, and everybody would have to admit it. If they don't, they're not going to be able to keep the smirk off of their face. So we will continue to work on that budget through the end of the session. Same thing will happen in the 28th year, and things change. So, but when the governor leaves office, he will be leaving the next governor ongoing structural deficits from 2028 on. The governor and the rest of we Californians. I don't think that's a very good legacy.
Should we be cutting programs dramatically down, even though we have revenues coming in above estimate? So I think it's like a philosophical question, right? Should we be doing these cuts if we're not forced to do them now? Or does it make sense to delay and kick the can to the next governor?
We should be cutting programs that aren't working. What we're not doing, and I said this, I think you weren't here a few minutes ago when I answered that question. I have been saying for the past 3 years that we absolutely have to look at spending cuts, but the only way to do it is a methodological way, and that is to take a look at programs that have either begun or been enhanced in the last 6 or 7 years, since the big surplus years, and just see whether or not they're accomplishing what they were intended to accomplish. And if they're not, that's where we ought to look at cutbacks. Or if they are, but their increase is not sustainable, then we need to cut back on that. That's where we'll get the answers, but that hasn't been done, and I've asked the Democrats and their budget staff, as well as the Department of Finance, to begin working on exactly that methodological approach, but they're not doing it.
Why?
I can't answer that question.
Why do you think?
Maybe because they don't want to cut.
Senator Niello,
Okay.
Senator, can I ask about your thoughts on the Prop 98 funding and a lot of school boards to unions to basically everyone is kind of actually making the same, raising the same concerns that affect school funding here locally. Can I get your thoughts on China's?
The interesting thing about Proposition 98 is it's constitutionally guaranteed. And with revenues increasing, it's increasing. But enrollment is decreasing. I think we need to ask that question. I won't give an answer to it now, but I think that's a fundamental question that we need to ask. But in the governor's presentation, he talked about significant increases in per pupil spending during his administration, much of it constitutionally required by Proposition 98, but nonetheless, also during that time, achievement has decreased. Our achievement in California versus the rest of the country is dismal, especially for kids from disadvantaged areas, and in particular black and brown kids. It's absolutely deplorable. Now, I criticize the governor a lot for talking about how much money he spends, but not talking about outcomes. At the end of that, he did talk about an outcome. That performance had increased in the last year, right? That was on top of a base that was absolutely dismal. You know, even a declining trend line will go up every once in a while. The spending, the significant spending that we have in education per pupil is not producing the results that it should.
Do you think it's about misinvestment, investment in the wrong areas? Or?
That's another area where we should dig into the detail and find out why.
Senator, just so I'm clear, did you say that the budget actually is not balanced?
I believe that the budget is not balanced because there is nothing in there for what we're kind of euphemistically calling, or Jerry Brown actually penned the term, the wall of debt. He exterminated it, and that's internal borrowing. And we now have over $30 billion that we owe internally, number one. And number two, once we get into 2028, even with the governor's numbers that are nominally balanced, even he admits beyond there, we continue to have a structural deficit. So that's not causing it's not solving the fundamental problem.
Senator, what is borrowing having to do with unemployment insurance, or what is the internal borrowing?
Internal borrowing is borrowing from other funds within the state. The unemployment insurance is over on top, above and on top of that by $20 billion. We put the 30 on top of 20, that's 50.
Senator, what do you see as the governor's fiscal legacy?
That question was asked also. I think it'll be pretty lousy. If you compare it to the budget that Governor Brown left him, it is not at all comparable. He's trying to say it is because he says he has a balanced budget for 26, 27, and 27, 28. I challenge that anyway because of internal borrowing, and in any case. But beyond that, even he admits the structural deficit is not solved. We still have, after 2028, we still have over $10 billion per year, each year, in continuing deficits, with revenue still growing, sans a crash of the stock market. I think between now and then, it's got to have some kind of correction. I don't know what the magnitude of that effect will be.
I'll ask you, Senator, just last, about